The maintenance bay of the space station Meridian buzzed with the usual chaos of shift change. Engineers hurried past carrying tool kits, their boots echoing against the metal flooring. Among them, a young woman in grease-stained coveralls moved quietly between the massive fighter ships, her movements precise and careful. Her name was Elena Vasquez, though most people just called her the new tech or didn't bother learning her name at all. Elena had been working in the maintenance department for 8 months now, ever since she'd arrived on the station with nothing but a worn duffel bag and forged identification papers. The other workers saw her as just another refugee from the outer colonies, grateful for any job that kept her fed and housed. They had no idea that she'd once been Lieutenant Commander Elena Vasquez of the Colonial Defense Force, one of their most decorated fighter pilots before everything went wrong. The memories still haunted her dreams. The court-martial, the accusations of disobedience, the stripped rank and dishonored discharge, all because she'd refused to follow an order that would have meant the death of innocent civilians. Her commanding officers called it insubordination. Elena called it doing what was right. Either way, it had cost her everything she'd worked for since she was 18 years old. Now she spent her days maintaining the very fighters she used to pilot. The irony wasn't lost on her. Every morning she'd run diagnostics on the engines, check weapon systems, and repair hull damage from training exercises. Her hands knew these ships better than anyone realized. She could spot a misaligned thruster from across the hangar, hear when an engine was running just slightly off tune. The other mechanics respected her skills, even if they didn't know where she'd learned them. Commander Sarah Chen was reviewing the duty roster when the first alarm sounded. Red lights began flashing throughout the station, and the automated voice system crackled to life. Alert! Multiple unidentified contacts approaching. All personnel to battle stations. This is not a drill. Elena's wrench clattered to the deck as she looked up at the nearest display screen. Her blood turned cold. 6 enemy fighters had appeared on long-range sensors, moving fast toward the station. They were Talon-class interceptors, fast and deadly, painted in the crimson and black of the Crimson Tide pirates. These weren't random raiders looking for easy cargo. They were here for something specific. The pilot alarm began sounding, calling all available fighter pilots to their ships. Elena watched as the station's 3 active pilots rushed past her toward the launch bays, 3 pilots against 6 enemy fighters. Even with the station's defensive guns, those weren't good odds. She knew because she'd faced similar odds before, back when she still wore a uniform that meant something. Minutes passed like hours as Elena continued her work, trying to ignore the chatter over the comm system. The defensive turrets had opened fire, but the enemy fighters were too fast and agile. They were dancing between the gun positions, getting closer to the station with each passing moment. Then the worst news came over the speakers. Fighter 2 is down. Pilot ejected safely, but the ship is destroyed. Elena's hands clenched around her tools. One of the station's fighters was already gone. That left only 2 pilots to face 6 enemies. She looked around the maintenance bay at her fellow workers. They were scared, some of them hiding behind equipment or making their way to the emergency shelters. But Elena couldn't move. She was transfixed by the tactical display showing the battle outside. Another voice crackled over the comm. Fighter 3 has lost main engines, returning to base for emergency landing. Now there was only 1 pilot left. Elena knew him, Lieutenant Marcus Webb. He was young, maybe 25, with good reflexes but limited combat experience. He was brave and skilled, but he was about to face 6 veteran pirates alone. It would be suicide. Elena made her decision before she could talk herself out of it. She dropped her tools and started moving toward the hangar where the reserve fighters were kept. These were backup ships, older models that were kept in case of emergency. They weren't as advanced as the primary fighters, but they could still fly and fight. More importantly, Elena knew she could fly them better than anyone else on the station. The hangar was empty except for security systems and automated equipment. Elena's fingers flew over the computer terminal using maintenance codes she'd memorized to override the launch protocols. She told the system she was performing an emergency test flight, a lie that would buy her maybe 15 minutes before someone figured out what she was really doing. Fighter designation. Bravo 7 powered up with a familiar hum. Elena slipped into the pilot's seat like she was coming home after a long journey. Her hands found the controls without conscious thought, muscle memory taking over. The heads-up display flickered to life, showing her weapons status, engine readiness, and tactical information. Everything was green. She sealed the cockpit and activated the launch sequence. The hangar doors opened to reveal the star field beyond, interrupted by flashes of weapons fire as the battle continued. On her sensors, she could see Lieutenant Webb's fighter darting between asteroids, trying to avoid the coordinated attack of the 6 enemy ships. He was skilled, but he was already taking damage. Elena's fighter shot out of the hangar like a bullet, immediately accelerating toward the combat zone. She kept her comm system off, not wanting to explain herself until after the fighting was done. Right now, the only thing that mattered was evening the odds. The first enemy pilot never saw her coming. Elena approached from below the battle zone, using an asteroid's gravity shadow to mask her approach. She lined up her shot carefully, waiting for the perfect moment. Her fingers squeezed the trigger, and twin beams of coherent energy lanced out across space. The enemy fighter exploded in a brilliant flash of light and debris. Now the real fight would begin. 5 enemy fighters suddenly realized they had a new opponent, one who had just announced her presence by destroying one of their own with a single perfect shot. Elena smiled grimly as she threw her fighter into a spiraling climb, drawing the pirates away from Lieutenant Webb and giving him a chance to regroup. The comm channel exploded with confused chatter from the station's control room. They couldn't understand where this mysterious 7th fighter had come from or who was piloting it. Elena ignored the questions and focused on the battle. She had work to do. The 2nd enemy fighter came at Elena head-on, its pilot clearly angry about losing a wingman. Red energy bolts streaked past her cockpit as she rolled her ship into a corkscrew pattern, a defensive maneuver that made her fighter dance unpredictably through space. The enemy pilot was good, she had to admit, but he was fighting with emotion instead of tactical thinking. Elena waited until the last possible second before yanking her stick hard to port. Her fighter spun away from the collision course just as the enemy ship flashed past her position. In that brief moment when their ships passed each other, she had a perfect shot at his unshielded rear quarter. Her targeting computer locked on instantly, and she fired. The enemy fighter shuddered as her shots punched through its rear armor, causing secondary explosions throughout the ship. It tumbled end over end before the pilot managed to eject, his escape pod spinning away into the darkness. 2 down, 4 to go. Lieutenant Webb's voice crackled over the comm system, filled with amazement and gratitude. "Unknown fighter, this is Webb. I don't know who you are, but thank you. My ship's been damaged, but I can still fight." Elena finally activated her transmitter, but she kept her identity hidden. "Stay close, Lieutenant. We're outnumbered, but not outmatched. Follow my lead and watch for crossfire." The remaining 4 enemy fighters had regrouped and were approaching more cautiously now. They'd realized that their new opponent wasn't just another station pilot they could overwhelm with superior numbers. These pirates were veterans of dozens of raids, and they began to coordinate their attack pattern like the professionals they were. Elena's tactical display showed the enemy ships spreading out, trying to surround her and Webb. It was a classic pincer movement, designed to force them into a position where they couldn't avoid crossfire from multiple directions. But Elena had faced this exact scenario before, during the siege of Kepler Station 3 years ago. She knew how to turn their own tactics against them. "Webb, on my mark. Brake hard starboard and climb. I'm going to thread the needle." "Understood. Unknown. Ready when you are." Elena throttled forward. accelerating directly toward the center of the enemy formation. It looked like a suicide run, the kind of desperate move that inexperienced pilots made when they panicked. The enemy pilots took the bait, converging on her position to finish her off quickly. At the last possible moment, Elena cut her engines and fired her maneuvering thrusters in a complex pattern that sent her fighter spinning like a top. The sudden change in momentum caused 3 of the enemy fighters to overshoot their target, bringing them directly into Webb's line of fire as he completed his climbing turn. Webb didn't waste the opportunity. His shots caught the lead enemy fighter in the cockpit, killing the pilot instantly. The ship drifted away, powerless and dark. The second enemy pilot tried to compensate, but Elena had already reoriented her fighter and was firing again. Her shots crippled his port engine, sending him spiraling out of control toward a nearby asteroid. That left only 2 enemy fighters, but these were clearly the squadron leaders. They didn't panic or make desperate moves like their wingmen had. Instead, they fell back to a defensive position and began a careful, methodical attack. These pilots knew their business, and Elena realized she was facing opponents worthy of her skills. The battle became a deadly game of 3-dimensional chess, with each pilot trying to anticipate their opponent's moves while positioning for the killing shot. Elena and Webb worked together like they'd been partners for years, covering each other's blind spots and coordinating their attacks. But the enemy pilots were equally skilled, and they had the advantage of long experience fighting together. For several minutes, the 4 fighters danced through space in an intricate pattern of attack and evasion. Energy weapons lit up the darkness as each pilot sought the perfect firing solution. Elena's fighter took several hits, causing damage warnings to flash on her display, but nothing critical was hit. Webb wasn't as lucky. A direct hit from one of the enemy fighters punched through his port wing, causing fuel to vent into space. "I'm losing fuel fast," Webb reported, his voice tight with concentration. "I've got maybe 5 minutes before I'm running on fumes." Elena made another split-second decision. "Break off and return to base. I'll handle these 2. "Negative. I'm not leaving you alone against 2 fighters." "That's an order, Lieutenant." There was silence on the comm for a moment before Webb responded. "With respect, unknown pilot, you're not in my chain of command. We finish this together." Elena found herself smiling despite the situation. The young pilot had courage. She'd give him that. It reminded her of herself at that age, back when she'd believed that honor and duty meant something. Maybe they still did. The enemy pilots had used the brief lull in combat to coordinate another attack. They came at Elena and Webb from opposite directions, forcing them to split their attention between multiple targets. It was a sound, tactical move, but Elena had been expecting it. She'd been watching their patterns, learning how these particular pilots thought and fought. She rolled her fighter inverted and dove toward the station, using its bulk as cover while she repositioned. One of the enemy pilots followed her, leaving his wingman to deal with Webb. That was exactly what Elena had hoped for. Now it was 2 separate one-on-one fights instead of a 4-way melee. The enemy pilot pursuing her was skilled and aggressive, pressing his attack even as Elena led him through a maze of asteroids and debris. He was so focused on getting a clear shot at her that he didn't notice the trap she was setting. Elena timed her maneuver perfectly, using an asteroid's gravity to slingshot her fighter around in a tight arc that brought her up behind her pursuer. Her targeting computer acquired lock just as the enemy pilot realized his mistake. He tried to break away, but it was too late. Elena's shots struck his fighter's reactor core, and the ship vanished in a brilliant explosion that lit up the surrounding space. Only one enemy fighter remained, and Elena could see on her tactical display that Webb was holding his own against the final pilot. The young lieutenant's damaged fighter was slower and less maneuverable, but he was using defensive positioning to neutralize his opponent's advantages. Elena moved to support him, but before she could engage, Webb managed to score a direct hit on the enemy fighter's cockpit. The last enemy ship went dark and began drifting away from the battle zone, its pilot either dead or unconscious. The space around Meridian Station was suddenly quiet, except for the distant hum of the station's engines and the crackle of cooling debris from the destroyed fighters. Elena let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The immediate threat was over, but now she had to face a different kind of challenge. Her comm system was lighting up with transmission requests from the station. Commander Chen wanted to know who she was and how she'd gotten access to a fighter. There would be questions, investigations, and eventually the truth would come out. But for now, Lieutenant Webb was safe. The station was secure, and 6 enemy fighters had been defeated in less than 20 minutes. Elena allowed herself a moment of satisfaction before beginning her approach to the station's landing bay. She'd kept her skills sharp during all those months in the maintenance department, and when her people needed her, she'd been ready. The hardest part would be explaining why a disgraced maintenance worker had just pulled off one of the most impressive displays of fighter piloting that anyone on the station had ever seen. Elena's fighter settled onto the landing pad with barely a whisper, her piloting skills evident even in the way she handled the routine landing procedure. The hangar bay was filled with people now, maintenance crews rushing to service the damaged fighters, medical teams standing by for casualties, and security personnel who looked very interested in having a conversation with whoever had just stolen a military fighter. Commander Sarah Chen stood near the landing pad, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. Beside her was Lieutenant Webb, who had landed just minutes before Elena. His flight suit was stained with sweat and adrenaline, but he was alive and whole. Several other station personnel were gathered around, all waiting to see who would emerge from the mystery fighter. Elena sat in her cockpit for a long moment, gathering her thoughts. Through the transparent aluminum canopy, she could see the faces of the people waiting for her. Some looked curious, others suspicious, and a few appeared grateful. She recognized most of them from her time working in maintenance, though they probably barely remembered the quiet woman who fixed their ships and kept to herself. The cockpit hissed open, and Elena removed her flight helmet, letting her long black hair fall free. She climbed down from the fighter with the easy confidence of someone who had done this thousands of times before, ignoring the surprised murmurs from the crowd. The last thing most of them had expected was to see Elena Vasquez, the maintenance worker, stepping out of a combat fighter. Commander Chen approached her first, her expression shifting from surprise to something that might have been respect. "Ms. Vasquez, I think we need to talk. My office now." Elena nodded, unsurprised by the order. She'd known this moment would come eventually. She followed the commander through the corridors of the station, aware that dozens of eyes were tracking her movements. Word would spread quickly through Meridian Station that the quiet maintenance worker was apparently much more than she'd seemed. The commander's office was a small, utilitarian space filled with tactical displays and personnel reports. Chen gestured for Elena to take a seat while she activated the room's privacy screens. Whatever conversation they were about to have, it wasn't for public consumption. "Your real name is Elena Vasquez," Chen said, consulting a file on her desk. "Former Lieutenant Commander, Colonial Defense Force, dishonorably discharged following court-martial for disobedience of direct orders during the Titan Colony incident." Elena met the commander's gaze steadily. "That's correct. According to your service record, you were one of the most decorated fighter pilots in the fleet. 43 confirmed enemy kills, recipient of the Silver Star and the Distinguished Flying Cross. You were being considered for promotion to squadron commander before everything fell apart." "Also correct." Chen leaned back in her chair, studying Elena's face. "The official report says you refused a direct order to engage enemy positions because civilian shields were in the area. Your commanding officer court-martialed you for cowardice and insubordination." For the first time since entering the office, Elena's composed expression cracked slightly. The pain of those memories was still fresh, even after all this time. The order would have resulted in the deaths of over 200 innocent people, including children. I couldn't follow it. And that cost you everything. Chen's voice was gentler now. Your career, your reputation, your future in the military. Elena nodded. I've never regretted the choice I made that day. Those civilians lived because I chose to disobey orders. That's worth more to me than any rank or medal. The commander was quiet for several minutes, reviewing the information on her screen. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful. What happened out there today, Ms. Vasquez? 6 enemy fighters destroyed in under 20 minutes, with 0 friendly casualties. Even experienced squadron leaders would have trouble matching that performance. I did what needed to be done, Elena replied simply. Lieutenant Webb was outnumbered and outgunned. The station was in danger. I had the skills to help, so I helped. By stealing a military fighter and engaging in unauthorized combat operations? Elena smiled slightly at that. I prefer to think of it as an emergency test flight that happened to encounter hostile forces. Chen actually laughed at that response. You've got nerve. I'll give you that. Do you realize the position this puts me in? Technically, I should have you arrested for theft of military property and violation of station security protocols. I understand. On the other hand, Chen continued, you just saved this station and possibly dozens of lives. Lieutenant Webb spoke very highly of your performance during the battle. He said you fought like you'd been his wingman for years. Elena thought about Webb's courage during the fight, his refusal to abandon her even when his fighter was damaged and leaking fuel. He's a good pilot and a good man. He'll make an excellent squadron leader someday if he gets the chance. What about you? Chen asked. What do you want, Elena? You've been hiding here for 8 months, working in maintenance and keeping your head down. But today you reminded everyone what you're really capable of. That changes things. Elena considered the question carefully. For months, she'd been content to disappear into the anonymous ranks of station personnel, grateful for steady work and a place to sleep. But the battle had awakened something in her that she'd tried to bury. The feeling of being in a fighter's cockpit again, of using her skills to protect people who needed protecting, had reminded her why she'd chosen to become a pilot in the first place. I want to serve, she said finally. I want to use my skills to protect people, to make a difference. I know my military career is over, but maybe there's another way. Chen smiled for the first time since Elena had entered the office. As it happens, I've been authorized to expand our fighter wing. The pirate activity in this sector has been increasing, and today's attack proves that we need more experienced pilots. I could use someone with your skills and experience, someone who understands what it means to put principle before personal advancement. Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. You're offering me a position? Chief Flight Instructor and Squadron Advisor, Chen confirmed. It's not a military rank, but it would give you authority over flight operations and pilot training. You'd be responsible for preparing our pilots for exactly the kind of situation we faced today. It wasn't the same as being a squadron commander, but it was a chance to do what she did best while helping others develop their own skills. More importantly, it was a chance to belong somewhere again, to be part of something larger than herself. I accept, Elena said without hesitation. Chen activated her communication system and called for Lieutenant Webb to join them in the office. When the young pilot arrived, still looking somewhat shell-shocked from the battle, the commander gestured for him to take a seat. Lieutenant, I'm promoting you to squadron leader, effective immediately. Your actions today demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership we need in our fighter wing. Webb looked stunned by the unexpected promotion. Thank you, Commander. I don't know what to say. Say, you'll work with Chief Instructor Vasquez here to make sure our pilots are ready for whatever comes next, Chen replied. Because something tells me today's attack was just the beginning. Elena extended her hand to Webb, who shook it with obvious respect. I look forward to working with you, Squadron Leader. You've got good instincts and real courage. Those are the most important qualities a leader can have. As they left the commander's office together, Elena reflected on how much her life had changed in the span of a few hours. This morning, she'd been a forgotten maintenance worker with a shameful past. Tonight, she was preparing to take on the responsibility of training the next generation of fighter pilots. The corridors of Meridian Station looked different to her now, more like home than just a place to hide. She had work to do, pilots to train, and a purpose that went beyond just surviving from day to day. For the first time since her court-martial, Elena Vasquez felt like herself again. The pirates who had attacked today were part of a larger organization, and they would certainly return with more ships and better coordination. When they did, they would find a very different reception waiting for them. Elena would make sure of that. The quiet maintenance worker was gone, replaced by someone who remembered what it meant to fight for something worth defending. In the days that followed, stories of the mysterious pilot who had turned the tide of battle would spread throughout the station and beyond. Some would be accurate, others would be wildly exaggerated, but all of them would center around the same basic truth. When her people needed her most, Elena Vasquez had been ready to answer the call. Nobody had known she was a pilot, but now everyone knew exactly what that meant.